Hello and welcome everyone to another Albion Online Dev Talk. My name is Robin Henkes, I'm the game director, and today I want to talk to you about a set of features we're introducing with the K update, collectively known as GVG seasons. As you know, a key aspect of Albion Online is warfare between guilds. As a matter of fact, you might consider guild versus guild the end game of Albion Online. It's, guilds fighting for control of the Outlanders. With the introduction of the GVG seasons in K, we wanted to improve upon this experience and address a couple of things that we weren't too happy with or that we were concerned with. So let's jump right into those. There's actually quite a few of them. One, we wanted to add more meaning to territory control. We wanted to have it be more important to hold territory. We wanted to prevent, at the same time, the game of territorial control from becoming stale, from a stagnant strategic situations where guilds were locked in a position where nobody wanted to fight anymore. We wanted to open the guild warfare to more players. While the GVG system has many advantages, allowing small groups of players not to be overrun by large groups that zerg up, at the same time it means that not as many players are competing and are able to participate in the guild warfare, and we wanted to change that. We also wanted to make it more transparent of how guilds were doing in this system, how well they were comparing against others, and who was actually currently winning the battle for the Outlands. And finally, we wanted to make it possible to fight for your guild's success at any time, not only at designated GVG times, which basically made it impossible to just log on to Albion and say, I want to contribute now. But where you had to wait. And while we will keep that aspect of waiting, we wanted to make it possible to also contribute at any point in time. And this is why we're introducing GVG seasons. So let's get into what they actually are. It's a bit of a narrative time. So while the conquerors of Albion, the newly arrived, that is you, were busy fighting over the land and discovering its powers through discovering what the weapons can do and fighting over the land, there was a group of mages that went deeper and studied the magic of the land. And eventually they found a way to siphon its energy, to get to the core, raw energy of what makes Albion magical. And this way that they discovered, they offered up to the guilds. And this is the change that is now coming to Albion with the K update. We're updating the graphics of the resource territories because these are the ancient sites where energy can be siphoned. And each guild that owns territories will now have a number of mages in each resource territory in their employ that are working to siphon those energies. So once the GVG season starts, you will have these mages and they will be busy siphoning energy in each resource territory. Now, the siphoned energy can be used to create some really powerful things. Primarily, they can be used to empower the battle mounts, build the battle mounts actually, that we showed to you in a previous video. But they can also be used as a means to getting your hands on artifact gear if you have no other way, or if you need additional artifact gear. In particular, the new level 3 artifacts can be gained through the system quite well. To get your hands on this energy, you will need to either control territories and have these mages in your employ, or you go out and raid these territories. So you go out and kill these mages, they will drop some energy, you can take control of that, and you can use it for yourself. So this is a way for guilds that don't have the strength to hold territory themselves to still get their hands on energy. The land itself, though, doesn't take well really to being exploited that way. Occasionally it will rise up against those who would take its power, and this is an event that we call an invasion. An invasion is a major upset where basically all territories all resource territories. This does not affect farms and does not affect homes of guilds, but it affects all resource territories. They are reset so that guilds lose control of them, and a magical entity takes control of them. And until that entity is destroyed, they cannot be reclaimed. Now, what is the season aspect of this? Well, the season aspect of this is that for any energy gained, the guild also gains a season score. And that score is used to determine the guild's position in a leaderboard, and it also determines eventually who will win the season. Winning a season, it will give you a permanent addition to your heraldry, so everyone can see that you have won a season before, and throughout the next season your banner will be displayed in Carlion. Now, how does the season design achieve what we set out to do? The raids give you an anytime PvP activity that contributes to your guild's success in the season and allows you to gather power to gain access to some really powerful equipment. The invasions, they prevent the Outland gameplay from becoming too stale. They have a massive upset potential because on this day, guilds will need to compete for territories, and there's a lot of potential for betrayal and fights. In addition, both the raids and the territory, the invasions, allow guilds to have more people than just their core GVG team compete. They can, everyone is important during an invasion, because if you want to get your hands on several territories, you will need to split your group, so you will need a lot of players to have enough potential to control the land. And the raids obviously are a way for everyone in the guild to contribute. So if you have some fighting power and have the ability to overpower the mages, you can contribute. You don't need to be the best GVG fighter. The leaderboards, obviously, and the season winner make it very transparent and rewarding to be successful in this, and you can always see how you're doing against other guilds, and this will hopefully make the competition between guilds more thriving. I believe that already ticks all the boxes that we initially set out to do. We're really excited to see how the GVG seasons will change the competition between guilds and what effect the introduction of things like battle mounts, of raids, of the leaderboards will have on Outland Warfare. The first season of Albion Online starts on December 9th, 2017, just after the introduction of the K update. I'm very much looking forward to see what you do with it. And thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new Albion Online Dev Talk. My name is Michael Schwan. I'm the game designer mainly responsible for PvP, and today I want to talk to you about the changes in this field for the new upcoming content update. And like we already mentioned before, we have been working on the technical side to improve large-scale fights, and we have also been thinking on the design side how we can improve them and how we can make them more exciting, what we can add, what layer we can add to make it more exciting. And some idea that has been floating around for quite some while, which we finally implemented now, is adding battle mounts. That means players on mounts contribute to the fight. They can activate spells while they're mounted. And on a high level, how we envision this is we have, like, say, two armies clashing, and you have 10 to 20 normal players without mounts and one or two mounts accompanying them and amplifying their strengths. We don't want to push the game into only mounted players. With this being said, let's get straight into it. The first mount we have is the Command Mammoth. That's a big tank which is with a lot of hit points and super high armor that can buff all the allies. It can provide a big shield aura, shielding allies around it. It can increase their strength, send out a charge command when all your allies have a short attack steroid to dive in. And it's really hard to take down for the enemies because it has so many hit points. And this brings us to the next mount. That's the Flame Basilisk. This is a swamp dragon that's kind of like an artillery that can fire AoE flames everywhere, which sets the enemies on fire. And they have a long-lasting dot, which is not overwritten, so you cannot bring 20 of these and burst someone down. But the E-spell of this Flame Basilisk deals percentage-based damage, which is a very good counter against the Mammoth, because it has a high hit point pool, and you can reduce it by a percent. And if you think, oh, well, we can already do that with poison potions, that will be changed in K. Poison potions will still deal true damage, but they have a fixed amount that is adjusted for a player health and is not that strong against the Mammoth. And last but not least, we have the Venom Basilisk. That's the poison-spitting brother of the Flame Basilisk. This one is armored and can dive into the enemy line a bit better and survives more. And he can debuff the enemies. He can spit poison that reduces the armor, or he can weaken them that they have less attack power for a shortened time. And all these mounts are built in a way that you usually don't want to stack them too much because their effects override each other. And so we keep the balance where we have like a certain amount of regular players and some mounts in between. And we are really looking forward to how the fights will look and how what metagame can evolve around that, where you try to counter the mounts of the other guild. And but we have more stuff for you, since we have been focusing more on how we can make the large-scale fights or open-world fights in general more exciting. We are adding new weapons, the Artifact Level 3 weapons, which are usually designed for open-world fights and group fights. They are very hard to obtain. You usually get them through castles, raid bosses, some extent hellgates, and other bosses. So we expect them to be used in group fights mostly. And to give you some examples, there is this Camlan mace. It's a huge mace where you can shoot this skill shot, which is like a shockwave. As the first enemy it hits, it will create like a black hole around this enemy. It pulls all the other enemies toward them after a short delay. So a very strong tool for big fights to group your enemies up. Or we have the Flame Tornado, which has a very long cooldown but deals a massive amount of damage. Also very strong in these large fights. And another nice example is maybe the Bow of Baden. It's the new artifact bow. It shoots a lightning arrow. And when it hits an enemy, it creates a storm cloud that rains down thunder. And once an enemy is struck by thunder, he will be electrocuted for a while. So he stays under the effect of the thunder. And while he's under the effect of the thunder, he cannot cast spells. So it's a very strong counter for, say, maybe holy healers. They cannot use their Q, but all the other instant abilities will still work. And that's just a few examples. There's a lot of interesting spells coming. And we are really looking forward to how the meta will change and what you can do with this. Also, really looking forward to some videos of the community. And one thing regarding meta changes, of course, with K, we are also doing a combat balance update where we adjust, for instance, Grudge and other abilities, so don't worry about that. And another important source for these new items will be the GVG seasons, which we will be explaining in the next video in more detail. But in general, it's as a short overview, you get these rewards by taking part, and you get an energy source which you can then convert into either battle mounts, which are very expensive, or into relics, which you can then use to craft artifacts out of them. And that's it for this video. I'm really looking forward to how you will play the new items and some gameplay footage maybe from the community. And thanks for tuning in.
We've come to Prague to record the soundtrack for Albion Online. We've had the great opportunity to work with a great composer, Jonne, on a soundtrack that will actually be recorded by Prague Symphony Orchestra in the Rudolphinium, in the main concert hall here in Prague. Several members of our team have had experience with Jonne's music in the past, and he's been in games as a whole for quite a while. So we were quite excited to get him on board for Project Albion from the very beginning, but we now feel the time has come to give the game a real proper soundtrack.
My name is Jonne Valtonen and I'm a composer. I started doing electronic music in a computer demo scene in this group called Future Group, and I had an alias Purple Motion, which I did music under quite a few years. I've been writing and orchestrating and arranging music for Sega and Namco, and last I wrote music for Street Fighter 5. Now we are finally here doing music for this wonderful game. Quality of the orchestra. It's not always said that if you just hire an orchestra and go record there, you might not really get excellent results. But in Prague you always get that, and like we did this time as well. And the players are excellent, so that is basically the reason. And of course the Rudolphinium, which is a great place, has a great acoustics, and you can really hear it on the recording as well. The difference between an orchestra, using a real orchestra and sample libraries, is that sort of everything is possible. You have all the sounds available. You can do a very big legato lines and very like long lines, which you really can't do with sample-based material. The difference also is that samples are always dead. They don't sort of. You really need to work a lot to get the samples sort of expressive things out of the samples, but with an orchestra, all these players and all these melodic lines and everything that's sort of happening inside and outside and wherever, it's sort of nothing is ever static, and all the melodies and all the notes and all the sounds always have the experience of a player who's been doing it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So that is really a big difference. What makes Albion music special? I really have taken a lot of time and thought behind the fact that I've tried to avoid all the cliches what are usually in a game music. Also, because it's recorded with an orchestra and with in an excellent hall that has excellent acoustics, it sort of also gives you this three-dimensional space. I mean, you have your monitor there, but the music now it's sort of like it's expanding the picture in a way, because of the acoustics and because of everything. So I think it makes it sort of brings the world around you, and that is something special. I think that will happen.
So working on the factions was actually extremely exciting because we wanted to bring out the character of each faction through their music. And I think we've achieved that. Basically, every faction has a very distinct musical style. You have the kind of playful, sly, dangerous sound of the heretics.
So you have Morgana faction, which is very military. Keepers is try to give out the power. I mean, the brass really played loud. So.
You can hear the size in their music. You can hear their giantness, their strength.
A lot of power, a lot of percussions, basically a lot of like large instruments. I'm extremely excited about this. We really got everything we went for, and the orchestra played so well, which is not always the case. That I'm just really happy and excited.
Hi everybody, I'm Christoph Hombergs, Community Manager for Albion Online here at Sandbox Interactive. Today we're here to talk about the new artifact items, one of the coolest new features you'll see in the final beta of Albion Online. To have this feature explained to you and thus me, I brought two game designers here, Michael Schwan and Matt Woodward, who mainly designed this system. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
What are artifact items?
So artifact items are like the most powerful sort of bits of equipment in the world of Albion. A lot of them, particularly the ones from like the Morganas and the Keeper of the Undead, essentially leftovers from the last war, last big war in Albion, like many years ago. And you're kind of, because you're getting these out, these core items you're finding are like, the critical fragment. Like it's this particularly powerful sword that you can make, and what you're finding is like the backbone of the blade or something, like an old blade. Like this is something that's been lying around, or it's been in this boss's like loot pile for like hundreds or thousands of years or whatever. And you get that, and then you can take it back to like a skill craftsman. Like, what can we make this? This is like this sword blade is amazing. I will make you, or you will make me essentially, because you're the one crafting. You will make me a sword out of this, and then you can handle it together with a bunch of materials, and then you get this like really beautiful sword that's like restoring kind of some of the old power of Albion from the olden times. And similarly, we have the fragments that all these mobs drop. All mobs will veteran above mobs drop artifact fragments that you can kind of take to this guy in the city who like has been studying all the sort of the ancient mystical stuff, and with his help you can sort of bring them together, these like bits and pieces, and be like, okay, with this collection of stuff, you can make something that approximates like famous axe head, or this magical bow that used to use that. So it's all about digging up this lost power, this in some cases locked away power.
Why are you doing that?
So obviously, we want to compete other players, stuff, deciding what we're going to do next, and a couple of different things came together to bring us to do deeply. One is the fact that we want to have more cool loot, more gems and stuff dropping, but not enough gems to go around. You can make it really interesting, especially at the boss level, and also We were looking at bringing quite a lot of people who have a lot of money but don't have the Destiny board progress to be able to spend it effectively the most expensive weapons they haven't unlocked yet. So we have this new set of artifact items that both allow us to drop a lot of cool things from bosses and also give us a way of letting you basically, if you're rich but not progress as far, buy more expensive, more powerful weapons and armor so that you can kind of spend that money somewhere that's useful rather than just hard enough character.
Okay. How do you acquire one of these items?
The artifact items have to be built. You need kind of the base artifact, which is what drops from the boss. You get one of those from the appropriate boss, you take it back to a crafting building. You've got the skill, like the normal skill, like you want to craft an artifact sword, but if you can craft swords of that tier, you can craft the artifact sword, and there you have it essentially.
Okay. Speaking of artifact swords, what do we get to see?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of new artifact items. Actually, in total, there's 45 new weapons, 9 new armor sets, and 9 new offense. There's going to be a lot of new cool weapons. It's not only reskins, but we have a lot of fancy new stuff like an orb or dual-wielding weapons. And
What orb?
so it's an enigmatic orb. It's an arcane staff, basically. It's in the arcane staff family, but it's like an orb you use, and you can shoot like this and use a spell with it. We have also a demon skull, which is like the curse staff you get from hell. And it had also a cool channel ability where you hold it up and you have ghosts floating around you and they do AoE damage around you while you channel it.
Okay.
And yeah, it's gonna be really exciting. There's a lot of cool new fancy weapons and armor, and all with new spells.
Okay. What new spells are we talking about? Examples?
So like we had the skull right now. So it's a non-interruptible channel. You go into it's a risk versus reward thing because you have to go as a staff, as a ranged guy to go into the enemies. You can use the root on slot 2 to set it up. Then you start your channel, you do damage to all enemies, a normal amount, but on top of it you also do deal 2% of your max, of the enemy's max health per tick on each player you hit. So it's true damage, which is something we didn't have so far. It's a tank buster to some degree, and before you try it, the true damage, the percentage-based damage doesn't work against mobs, so you cannot insta-kill the demon prince by stacking it or something. So,
You should try. Okay.
yeah, I would try.
Probably at least once, right?
Yeah, you have.
Okay. We get an orb. We get the skull. We get dual swords. I think you said.
Yeah.
What else can we see?
Like dual crossbow. Where you have like we can't resist this one.
Yeah. It had to be done, right?
It had to be done. Then also like a huge ram you get. You go like this and slam the enemies. That's
Massive keeper log.
yeah, that's one of the really
And in terms of spells, what sets these artifact items apart?
So one thing is with the spells is it follows a bit of the basic concept we had with level 1, 2, 3 before. So the artifact level 1 is more single, solo based, and level 2 is group oriented, level 3 is like big fights. It's a loose theme, it's not always as strict, but so that means a lot of huge AoE spells are on the highest tier levels, anti-zerg things, and like this channel for instance, or you can. And also, what's also really interesting, despite all the new weapon spells, which you already know some of because they were introduced with Darians and new E-spells, actually artifact spells. But also it's really cool is you have with all the new armors and helmets and shoes coming in, they also get new spells that offers a huge amount of variety for your own build. We don't have that many new spells that is completely changing the meta. We want the game to stay in the same direction, but we want to add more variations, more details, more different ways of applying things. So
Basically, more choice for the player.
more choice. For instance, you can have an energy field, drop it on the ground, and you recover energy over time when you stand in there for your allies. So you have a way to give energy to your allies. That's something we also didn't have, and it's going to be really exciting.
Okay, let's talk about acquisition a little more. You said you go ahead and basically get this artifact base item. I assume it's a boss drop, right?
Yeah, so the main way, the most straightforward way of getting artifacts is you get these items that drop from bosses, that drop from gateway bosses, from hell bosses, from raid bosses. Basically, yeah, like all the bosses at the veteran and elite level can drop something. There's, Mikhail mentioned there's 3 levels of artifacts, kind of the base level, base level, level 1 and level 3, the highest level, themed by the factions, there's Morgana, Keeper and Undead, and then the level 2 is all hell-based, hell-themed, so it drops from the hell bosses, so if you kill a Morgana, veteran boss somewhere, it can drop a Morgana artifact or item, and if you kill a hell boss, it can drop a hell one, kind of stuff. Yeah.
And of course, Morgana boss only drops Morgana themed stuff. Do all Morgana bosses drop the same, or?
No, so we've segmented so the hell bosses have to, because they're all, there's a tier 5 hell boss, whatever, that's the guy, he drops the hell stuff. But for the other factions, so there's the 15 base types, and they're divided across the factions. So for instance, the keepers have the level 1 or level 3 axe, for example. I think they do axes. Yeah. So that's divided, and then within like each faction, each tier, and so on, and each power level, they have specific bosses about specific things. So like if you want the dual axes, it's one of these set of keeper bosses basically who have the warrior oriented bosses, the more fighty ones. So they drop those. So if you know I want this artifact, there are specific bosses in the world that you can go, okay, this don't do, because this has the thing. If you don't want that specific artifact, or if you want to help a friend who's working towards an artifact from a boss that doesn't drop anything that you want, all the bosses and also all the veteran elite mobs will also drop artifact fragments. Fragments.
Okay.
Bits of artifact that you kind of pick up along the way, and you can get quite big piles of them from like the demon pits or whatever, and there's a low chance of getting it from a normal veteran mob. And these you can take back to the city with a new building, and you can meld them together to create kind of random artifact within their kind of power and tier and so on. So usually there's a choice of like 5 or so a given like stack of fragments can produce. So it's like one of these, but you can also, for fewer fragments, do a kind of broader range, maybe one of the 15 at that particular branch or whatever. So it can be cheaper, but they're less specific. So if you know exactly what you want, again, you can save the right fragments, and these are distributed. You need different types, but they're all distributed across all the things. So if you're going to go kill, Mikhail really wants the dual axes, that's what I've got in my head right now. So we want to go kill the Earth Mother, for example, or some other keeper veteran boss in a gateway. They will drop, and the mobs around them will drop fragments that I need for my Morgana, or my Hell Demon, not my Hell thing, because that would be weird, but like my whatever, other keeper thing or something.
So basically, it's an incentive for people to tag along even if they don't need any particular.
Exactly.
Drop
Any dungeon that you do, any veteran or elite dungeon that you do, will give you fragments that you can use.
Okay.
But there's also an increased chance of getting particular artifacts from that dungeon. You can get particular weapons. So we have this balance between, again, same with the do you want to gamble plus 15 or 5? It's like specific versus people versus whatever. So it's choices you make.
So let's say a base item for an artifact drops. Mm-hmm. What do I see there? What do I do with it? How does it look?
So the item you'll get is like, for instance, stick with the dual axes, you might get like a set of keeper axe heads that drops as the item, and they'll have a tier. So they're like tier 6 keeper axe heads, and that's the dual axe, which is the level 3 artifact. So that's what I can make out of it. And then to make it, I need that, and then I need some materials, like the normal materials you'd need for an axe. You can also choose another thing we're adding. So in the current beta, the old beta in my head because we're working on a new one. In the current beta, we have normal weapons level 1, 2, 3, and then enchanted 1, 2, 3, or like 4, 5, 6 on top. And we're changing this now so that every item exists at tier 4 and upwards as a base item with no enchantment at the same power level. So the broadsword and the claymore, and now the dual swords, which replaces the glaive. The glaive is now spear. All the same power level, but then you can choose to enchant any one of those up to 3 levels of enchantment using rarer resources, without requiring a higher unlock. So if you can use the base broadsword, you can use the enchantment level 3 broadsword, which is like 3 tiers more powerful, but obviously the resources are much more rare, so it's not worth spending on. So you can spend it on enchanting, you can spend it on artifacts which give you a new look and new spells and so on. You can also enchant your artifact items. So you've got a lot of choice there in how you can do stuff.
And how does it fit into the Destiny board?
Destiny board has been changed up a bit. It's the same up until the tier 4 unlocks, where you've got the unlocks the individual weapons, so like the weapon branches, so the sword, the axe, the hammer, the mace, and the crossbow, for example, the warrior stuff. That node, all those now available at tier 4, so even like the ones, there was some stuff that wasn't, though, like the higher level stuff was further on. This is now every weapon base type is at tier 4. And that node, you can progress up to 10 levels. That will unlock all of this, in the sword case, all the swords on that thing. So once you've maxed it out, you can use all the swords, all the broadswords, all the claymores, all the dual swords, all the artifact swords. And then there's 3 levels of three specialization nodes branching off that for the broadsword, the claymore, and the dual sword. And you can progress up each of those to get much bigger item power bonuses for that particular weapon. But all 4 of them, the base one and the 3 specializations, all give bonuses to all swords as well. So if you want to max out your claymore, you need to max out the broadsword specialization and the dual sword specialization, as well as the base one and the claymore one. So if you really want to get deep into the max possible stats, there's a lot of dedication required to get there. But it means if you want to mess around with axes, with swords, then there's an incentive to like play with other weapons. They unlock automatically anywhere, and they all count towards the base mode. So some more flexibility there.
Okay, and those artifact items are available from which tier on?
All from tier 4. So pretty much at tier 4 is where the item game really kind of spreads its wings. All the base items there, all the artifacts from tier 4, all the enchantments from tier 4. So it's really like, okay, 1, 2, 3, learn the game, tier 4, okay, now here's the whole toolbox, go have fun.
I'm quite excited. Okay, one spell. Which is your favorite of those new artifacts?
Ooh, favorite. I have one that comes into mind because I've been working recently on it, and it's also pretty fancy. It's on the Morgana Halberd. And it's a skill shot, which is a bit unusual, but you slice like this, you do like this heavy swing, and you have this this wave coming out, which has a bit of the shape like the Morgana Raven, which is pretty cool, and it deals damage to all enemies. It goes through them, and they bleed, and while they're bleeding, also their CC resistance is reduced, so they become more easy to be damaged by crowd control. So it's a really strong opener, and it's pretty cool. I like it.
Okay, guys, I think that's everything that I need to know, that you guys should know, and I must say I'm really, really excited. Before I was more excited about this skull, but now that I know that there's dual-wheel crossbows, I think I might change. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for joining. See you guys next time.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Reputation system is a system which adds consequence to the player's actions within the royal lands. Basically, under the reputation system, anyone choosing to renounce the king's law and attacking other players will incur a reputation penalty for their actions and may suffer the consequences, whereas people who are, being a good citizen, doing things the royal faction like, will gain a positive reputation and can show this reputation off. The King's Lands in Albion are actually a couple of outlying islands in front of the mainland. This is where the king established his control and where some cities have been built up. And this is where he's kind of assertive, he's kind of enforcing his law. And obviously the guards are not enough to be around everywhere, and this is why a large part of the royal lands are not considered safe, but they're much safer than the lawless lands. The lawless lands are deeper in the inland of Albion. They're actually the mainland, and there the king's forces simply haven't reached yet. They don't have any of this under control, and actually they're not really, aware that anyone's really there. But smugglers have popped up that are transporting people from these royal islands over to the lawless lands. and their guilds are forming who are taking control of the land and building empires on their own, completely beyond the king. Players will gain reputation by performing acts which are considered positive by the royal faction. These are actions like fighting the inhabitant creatures of Albion and beating the threat back that way, and by harvesting resources which basically drive the markets of Albion. These are the things that, while you're under the king's law, will incur a positive reputation. The benefit of having a positive reputation is, first and foremost, trust. Other players can see your positive reputation, and through seeing that, they know that you are not typically a person who breaks the king's law and attacks other people. This will allow you to form more solid social groups. There's also a second advantage to it. It also means that anyone attacking you will receive a higher penalty in reputation. So if you're a model citizen and someone attacks you, they will lose a drastic amount of reputation for this attack. And that somewhat protects you from people who are not quite willing to take that step and go down into the outlaw way of life. You can lose reputation in several ways. Primarily, you lose reputation by attacking other people. When you declare to be an outlaw and you enable your player killing mode, you will lose any positive reputation that you've gained up to that point. You are basically by renouncing the king's law, you basically lose any trust you've previously built up with them. From that point on, when you attack someone, you will lose reputation based on their standing. If they're another neutral player, the reputation loss will be minimal. If they are a good citizen, if they've accumulated some positive reputation, you'll lose quite a significant amount. Furthermore, if you, after attacking them, actually knock them out or kill them, the reputation penalties will be even higher. There are several consequences to having a negative reputation. One is that you are unable to leave the path of an outlaw. Once you've renounced the king's law, you may find that if you've taken too many negative actions, you may not be able to rejoin society, and you may not be able to actually disengage your PvP mode. The other way to lose, or the other consequence of losing reputation, is that you may not be allowed into the king's cities anymore. The guards will recognize you at the gate and will prevent you from entering or even attack you. Hello and welcome to yet another Albion Online Dev Talk. My name is Robin Henkes, Game Director of Albion Online, and I'm joined today by Christoph Homburgs, Community Manager, and also known as Talion on the forums.
Hi guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We're gonna have the Dev Talk be somewhat special today because Talion approached me and said, you want to do these GVG changes, but we don't really know what's happening. Please tell me. So I thought we'd have a talk about it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of questions on the forums after we published this draft, and so many people have questions about it. And I guess it's a good idea to go through the process step by step, explaining what we're doing exactly and especially why. I think that's the most important question.
Okay, so what do you know about the GVG rework?
Okay, so first we're splitting up the continents and move the territories to black zones. That's a given. But I think the most controversial part, and I guess we'll be talking about this.
Well, actually, let's jump in there directly,
okay,
because that's already an interesting point, because I think there's a lot of potential for misconceptions there.
Sure.
When we say black zones, what we actually mean is the new lawless continent, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just the few high-end zones that will have territories. It's actually an entire continent that has all kinds of zones, starting from tier 5 up to tier 8. And the difference is to the current situations that all of these will have black zone rules, right? That means full on PvP, no impact of the reputation system and all of that. But you'll still have territories in zones which don't have that many high-end resources. So we have to be really clear on that.
Okay, so basically you allow players to go into their own very lawless area where they can just, bash each other's heads in as they want without too many people being too afraid, to venture out in the world and be jumped at every point and turn.
Well, the reason for this change is that there's a huge disconnect between the organized guild play and the more casual players who don't have a guild yet, who are still looking at finding a guild, right? So we decided to put the territories on the lawless continent because the territories attract the strong and well-organized guilds. And
they basically have the time and manpower to put into the game, and they want to put it into the game, and they want to be rewarded by territories.
Absolutely, and that's why we want to give them a huge chunk of the game world, right? About half the world will be lawless. This is much more than what was previously, right? Right now, in the current beta phase, you have maybe 10-20% of the world being completely lawless, and in the future we'll have half the world being that. But as a additional measure, we're taking the guild territories out of the safer area to protect our initial players to a degree from the really organized guilds, which are sometimes called Zerg guilds, right?
But aren't you taking away the PvP opportunities for players who just want to casually do it?
No, I don't think so. At least
Okay.
First off, there'll still be PvP in what we call the royal continents, right? The continents where there's a certain amount of law. You can still just exit the city, flag yourself for PvP, and attack someone. There'll be the reputation system impacting that somewhat, but we'll talk about that in a future video. But the PvP is still fully enabled, right? The other thing is there'll be cities and outposts in the lawless continents where players who don't own a territory can still have a guild island and can still roam from there. They will have to compete with the stronger guilds holding territories, but given that there's quite a large landmass and not all of it is covered in territories, there should be enough room for PvP all over.
Okay, and these lawless continents, are they all going to be basically the same as in, not as in terms of biomes, but does it matter for me as a player or as a guild where I settle down in the lawless continents?
Yes, it does actually. There's a few factors that play a role, right? One is obviously our biomes. They are coming in with the new world. So what resources will be available, where you settle down, will be determined by the biome of the map you're choosing. And then there's a time zone change.
Explain that.
This is new, right? So we looked at the current GVG system after taking a survey with the players, and we figured out that there were certain situations where the ability to change times was being exploited to deal with, or to gain an advantage, right?
Yeah, I remember the reports of that.
Yeah, and when you start thinking about how to change times and when time changes come into effect, it gets really complicated and messy. And when you start thinking about how you would communicate that a time change will come into play at a later, it just starts to get really complicated. And we think that one of the key problems of the GVG system are the complications, the complexity of communicating it. So a key step in simplifying that is the introduction of a fixed time zone for a territory. So every territory, instead of giving the guild who's claiming it a choice, the territory will come with a preset time zone. And that will slightly change how guilds approach the system, right? It means that you're not just gonna choose to go to any territory. You'll take a look at where's a territory that is matching my time zone.
Okay, and those potential time zones, are they, allocated randomly, or is there any system behind it?
No, there's actually a system behind it, and there's more that we hope to get from it. So how you can imagine the time zones work is kind of like the real world. We'll have the whole world will have a floating set of time zones. So you'll not have like a North American and then a European and an Asian time zone. What you'll have is a map whose prime time maybe starts at 7 o'clock in the evening, and then next to it a map whose prime time starts at 8 o'clock in the evening. And then you'll have a few maps that start at 8 o'clock in the evening, and then you may get one that's at 9 o'clock in the evening, and a few more of 9 o'clock in the evening, and then at 10 o'clock in the evening, and so on. So you have this floating range of time zones, which basically means that for any guild choosing to settle in a certain time zone, there's enough room to expand at their own prime time. And this, I think, is something that is really cool, because that means we get rid of one thing that players complained a lot about in the survey, is the need to get up at inconvenient times to fight GVG battles.
Okay, there have been voices from especially those larger international guilds that this was basically a step in the wrong direction, because they spend, well, the majority of the beta gathering players from all time zones so they can fight effectively at basically every time of day.
Yes, and the question that we have to raise is that a cool thing? Is it a cool thing that you have to be an international guild to be competitive in Albion? And our answer was no. We want even smaller, more local guilds to be able to, do a little bit of GVG. The thing is, there's no downside to these international guilds, right? They can still fight their times, they can still hold territories at several places. If you had an international guild before, if fights were happening at 8 o'clock in the evening, you weren't able to join anyway, right? So now there's nothing changed in that system in that regard.
Okay, so it will still be manageable for a larger guild to hold territories in, let's say, the 9 p.m. time zone and the 1 a.m. time zone on, I don't know, spread throughout the day, and they still will have the possibility of, arranging the logistics to be able to be present everywhere, or.
Well, I mean, they'll have to consider how they approach their situation, right? Mm-hmm. They'll if they really want time zones that are completely apart from each other, then they will have to settle at a significant distance from another. But if each of their portions of the guild is significant and strong enough to actually do this, to hold a territory on their own at a certain time, then I see no reason why it shouldn't be possible to do this for them.
Okay, so basically it's a question of how do they organize it logistically, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the transportation potentially becomes more challenging in this system.
Which of course mustn't be necessarily a downside, right?
Which, yeah, I mean, we're always looking for actually reasons to move, to have players move over longer distance. But that's not a key goal. I think though that when we look at this, the pros outweigh the cons here, because with the fixed time zone, we get clarity for everyone when fights will be happening, and no changing of times randomly, and that will be really reliable, and that's something that's, I think, super cool for the system. The other is, as I said, you'll have neighbors who are on the same prime time. That means if you want to fight expanding battles, there'll always be at times that match your own chosen time zones. And the third part is obviously when you're roaming the world, you'll also have a much higher chance of encountering active players, because typically players who play at the same time as you will settle nearby. So I think those advantages really outweigh a few logistical challenges.
Okay, and what about balancing? I mean, our player base is spread throughout all over the world, but in different weighings, different proportions. How are you balancing that map-wise?
Yeah, and this is obviously an interesting question. What we will do as an initial balancing, and we'll obviously look if this works, but the initial balancing is we'll actually look at the player distribution numbers. So we'll look at how many players do we have who are playing at a certain time zone, and then we'll look at what times are those players actually playing, and from that we'll build a distribution that matches our actual player base. So certain time zones may be wider or a little bit more thin, but all of them will be wide enough so that you can expand a significant amount of time before you reach a time barrier, as you want.
And balancing is also a question when it comes to resources. I mean, if we introduce the new biomes and have them also in the lawless lands, those have to be factored into this balancing as well of the time zones, I guess, right?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the ideal goal would be that time zones at some point become so wide that they encompass all biomes. But for now, there may be situations where certain resources are favored in certain time zones, but only on certain tiers. So there's no clear cut, this is the absolute best for this resource or so on. But yes, that will factor in. However, with the floating time zone, if you're able to diverge a couple of hours from your key time zone, you should have access to all kinds of resources.
And apart from all this balancing, I mean, naturally it's also incentivizing trade a bit more, right? If for example, certain time zones have more, let's say, wood, it encourages also trading, which is an important aspect of the game. And
yeah, I mean, the biomes are going to do that anyway, right?
Yeah.
That they'll no longer be the situation where one guild can sit in one spot and say, we have all resources under our control. They will need to bring in resources from the outside. They'll need to trade. In this case, actually, the international guilds may have an advantage if they hold territories at a distance from each other, because that will allow them to gather resources from different biomes and bring them together in one place. So I think that the time zones are something very exciting, and we see how they'll work out, and then we'll let it play out.
Okay, so far about the balancing and the distribution. In terms of the GVG battles themselves, I think, or are there any changes coming into that? I mean, there were a lot of complaints about, for example, the no-shows for challenging a GVG battle, but then not showing up.
Yeah, that's really annoying, right? If someone declares an attack, you make the effort to get up or to be there, and then they don't show, and you just you can't win anything as a defender right now, right? So yes, this is something we looked at in depth, and our solution for that is pretty simple actually. It's counterattacks. So the idea here is that when a defender wins their defense really decisively, basically they ran down the attackers. The attackers showed up and then they ran them down, or the attackers didn't show up but they ran them down. Basically they win the battle significantly, decisively. Then they get a chance to immediately overrun the attackers back into their territory and have a counterattack. And how this is implemented is that basically as soon as you decisively win a defense, an automatic battle is scheduled for you at the attacker's territory. So you can now, immediately after the fight, gear up and get into that fight and have a chance at taking their territory from you. And that should really discourage players or guilds from making sort of fake attacks or underpowered attacks, right? This will not happen to you if you put up a decent fight and lose the attack, but if you show up in all tier 1 gear or something.
Or basically just try to block the attack slot.
Yeah, or if you just try to block the attack slot, or if you don't show, if you just want to harass, then you will be subject to these counterattacks.
And this counterattack itself, let's say I decisively won my defense battle and for some reason decide not to counterattack, basically because I have to go or something. Will that leave me open to another counterattack, or does it end there?
No, counterattacks, basically there's no counter of counterattacks. It's just a regular attack. If the attack fails badly, is subject to a counterattack.
Okay, is there anything else we're changing mechanically wise to the GVG? I mean, we're pretty happy with it as far as understood. What else is changing?
There's more changes. So there's yet another attack type actually. It's not that different though, and this was introduced to fix a particular exploit situation. So what is currently possible is that splitting your guild and attacking yourself is an advantage. And that is something that we didn't find. How this exploit works is you have your guild, it claims territory A, and you split your guild into a second one and they claim territory B. Now let's say territory A gets attacked. You quickly schedule an attack from your second territory against yourself at a later time. And this gives you a chance to retake the territory right after this takeover. And that's something we didn't like. We don't like the idea of guilds members split up to gain an advantage. So what we introduce is really retaliation attacks. Retaliation attacks basically allow you yourself to declare this attack, the secondary attack after you lose a territory, out of order. So how does that work? Well, let's say you hold territory A and B with your guild, right? and territory A is attacked by another guild and lost. Territory B, if it hasn't declared an attack yet, now gets an immediate chance to declare an attack, ignoring any pre-declaration time. So if there's any later time slot still available in that day, it can still be attacked.
Okay.
And that will basically make that exploit situation something that you can actually build on when you're building a defense, right? Because that means that if your territory gets lost, if you still have an adjacent one, you may get an immediate chance to take it back. And that means the would-be attackers, after taking your territories, have to be ready to defend it immediately. I think that's pretty exciting.
Okay, that in turn means that a guild that has a few neighboring territories will always be able to, quickly react to an attack or a loss of one of their territories. So
Yes.
basically, it's an incentive to, settle in a closed-off area instead of spreading out throughout whatever areas. Just
Yeah, I mean, sure. There's a certain advantage to clustering together, basically keeping a connected territory, and that's something we like because that gives us a feeling of spreading across the map, right? And it also logistically makes sense. But it's actually nothing new, right? As I said, like the situation has been existing. It just required some weird workarounds from the guilds, and we didn't like that, so we made what you invented actually work properly in the game.
so good. Yeah, what else? Despite retaliation, counterattacks, anything else coming to the GVG battles themselves? Is there any changes about the defender bonus, for example?
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's a big one, right? The defender bonus changes significantly, actually. So, the defender bonus is actually one of the things that we were quite unhappy with because it was gamed a lot in a way that didn't seem very intuitive to players. They never really understood why they would be getting a bonus, or how an attacker managed to get rid of the negative bonus before the fight happened, and all these things. So we're actually simplifying that by saying there's no more defender bonus loss for attacking. Defender bonus can also never be negative. And the only situation where you will actually have a defender bonus is if you recently lost a defense in that territory. So what that means is these defenses will actually only happen in home territory, right? The important note there is that the attacking side, when they take over a territory, they reset the defender bonus of the territory, and that means that they have to defend without a bonus. They have to wait for the defender bonus to get back up. And if they then lose a defense, they will get a temporary bonus.
Okay. So basically, if I fend off an attack on my home territory, the attacking guild will have a little bit of a harder time the next time they try.
No. If you lose a defense in your home territory, so basically the attacker has come and they're now really threatening your territory. Your chances of defending are actually increased. And the goal with this is to make the fight more exciting, right? If you lost the first
It sounds like a morale bonus or something. Like
it is. It basically, I mean, the defenders notice it's getting really serious, right? We're about to lose this territory. Let's pull together, and that's why we give them a bonus to make the last fight the most exciting one, right? Because in this instance, the defenders are fighting with the maximum chance. And if they can't do this, then they will lose their territory.
Makes sense. This last man standing or the last stand feeling, basically, in defending your home makes absolute sense gameplay-wise. Yeah. Anything else you want to tell us about the GVG system, which I haven't touched?
Yeah. There's actually more. We're obviously looking at there's even more, but I guess not so significant changes. One thing is we're polishing up the GVG experience itself. So we'll add more effects to capturing, objectives in the fight itself. We'll finally get around to making the UI pretty, showing you what guilds are actually fighting in the UI, what side you're on, and improving the stat screen at the end, so that's finally a proper screen. That's definitely coming.
What about the camps? Do they stay the same?
No, siege camps are receiving a slight adjustment as well. The main change is that there can be only one attack made from a siege camp in a day. Right now you can have up to 4, but there will be only one. and the siege camp will become available for attack at the beginning of the map prime time. So if basically the prime time of the map is 7 o'clock in the evening, at 7 o'clock in the evening the siege camp will become available for use. And if I then go there and pay some money, I can launch an attack from here on the connected territory, right? What is new is that the guild, or any guild who doesn't want an attack to be launched, can actually pay off the siege camp and say, instead of attacking today, you do nothing. It's basically paying the mercenaries some money to not set up a fight.
Okay.
And the goal of this is to avoid another situation where having a fake guild could be an advantage. Because already right now it's possible to waste an attack by attacking yourself with a fake guild. And this is basically legalizing this action by saying, nope, it's totally fine to pay mercenaries to not attack today, right?
And so basically you can prevent the siege camp from becoming active by saying mercenaries, here's some money and don't help anybody to attack out there.
Pretty much.
Okay. Last thing on my list, towers. What about them?
Yeah, okay. The idea of towers, watchtowers, is something that we've publicly said. What they basically are is a rework of the resource territory system and the farm territory. Okay. For the most part, you'll still have those, so we'll still have farm territories, and we'll still have territories which have a lot of resources in them. We may end up dropping essence territories because they have no further role right now. But the key change that's coming to these is that they will not be permanently protected by a border. Yeah.
Okay.
That's scary for a farmer, right? Because
Yeah.
if you take care of your guild farms, you have to be ready to be attacked at any point in time. The only time the borders will actually be enabled is while the fight is happening. So if a territory is being attacked, at the time when the fight's happening, we still guarantee the 5 versus 5 situation by having a border up. But outside of that time, these territories will not be protected. And that should be pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of skirmishes that will be going on there.
So I have to say a bit more on this, because obviously just opening that up would be a bit harsh for the guilds who maybe has their farms there. So the first thing you get is guards. While the fight's not happening, you have guards wearing your guild colors protecting these territories.
Do you set them up yourself, or are they automatically?
Well, I mean, as soon as you take over the territory, they spawn for your guild.
Okay.
Basically. But these guards are not impossible to overcome, right? You can kill them and then you have access to the resources inside of them.
Comparable to the city guards, or?
No, the city guards are much stronger. So more like a castle guards, right? Something
Okay.
you can if you fall. Maybe the individual player will not be able to do this, but if you form up in a small group, you'll be able to invade the territory. And on the other hand, the guild who owns the territory will be alerted to this attack. So that creates an opportunity to have the guild react and show up from somewhat, well, basically an open world fight.
Yeah, basically they get a message in chat like your territory is being attacked at the moment or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And suddenly we have a clash of a few groups in guild territories all the time.
Yeah. And this is part of how we want to see PvP in Albion develop further, right? We want to have cool open world PvP incentives, but critical fights, things that really change the map.
The territories, the cities.
We want to keep under the fair control of the GVG system, because there's just too many implications of making too critical things to done through massive fights. Massive fights risk the server for obvious reasons. They also give an advantage to these massive Zerg guilds, of which there aren't that many. So by protecting the territory control, but add in cool opportunities for open world fights, I think we'll find the Albion way.
Speaking of controlling the GVG environment, there have been questions in the forum about whether we plan to, limit the gear in some sort of way, like capping it at some tier or something to allow guilds that don't currently hold the territory to have an easier entrance into this system, because high-end gear so expensive.
Yeah, I see that concern a lot, and obviously people bring it up when we say we're removing territories from yellow zones, from red zones, right? And my answer is, well, the gear caps have a certain negative effect on a GVG, obviously, because it kind of diminishes the advantage that you build up through building a good economy and these sort of things. But if we do find that after this change we need these caps, then there's nothing stopping us from introducing them to certain territories on the lawless continent as well. They're basically saying the territories in the lower reach, the lower end with the access to the lower resources, still get a certain amount of this effect. That is something that we can look into if we really do see adverse effects of this.
Anything else about the GVG system we haven't talked about yet and which you absolutely need to get out?
I can't think of anything on top of my head. If there's anything I've left out, please post comments below. Apart from that, I hope this has helped you understand the upcoming changes much better. And I quite enjoyed the format.
Yeah, it was fun. Let's do this again.
Yeah, I hope we will have the chance to present more of the upcoming changes for the beta in this way. Yeah, stay tuned for that, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
The game world in Albion is built of many maps. They all have the same resources, they all have pretty much the same mobs, and this has historical reasons. Albion was built by a very small team and it needed to grow really, really fast. My name's Jörg, I'm a creative director on Albion Online. As part of that, I'm actually took over the responsibility of building the game world and the level design. So one of the things that we also got as a consistent feedback from the community after we started the beta was that the world doesn't feel alive. Too samey, too repetitive, not having enough variation. At the same time, because the beta was so successful, we saw, okay, obviously there are enough players that trust us to push this game forward, and maybe we should take a step back and maybe we should take the time to improve on this. We sat together, all designers, the game director, and our founders, and we thought, okay, how do we move on? Is the Albion as we have it right now in the beta really the game that we want to launch now? Our conclusion was not quite yet. There are certain parts that we really want to improve, there are certain parts that we really want to work on, and the biggest part of that is the game world. We took a look at how the world actually works. Well, one of the things that really stands out is that you usually have different biomes, and they can be found in Albion, but they are all contained in one singular map. So basically, if you go in the next map, you have all these different areas again. And that's something we need to move away from if we want to create a believable world. The most significant change is going to be the introduction of the biomes. Each biome will have its own flora and fauna, so it will have its own mobs, and it will bring its own resources. So in the future, in the new world, you will find fiber not in every map, but mainly in swamp areas. Imagine there's a huge city in the mountains. So this city will have way more ore than a city, say, in the forest. But both cities, the inhabitants, the players of both cities, need the resources of the other place. So we will encourage trading and bringing one resource to the other, from one marketplace to the other marketplace. It seems that Albion has two main groups of players. One is basically the kind of people that like to play in huge guilds and they like to dominate an area. They like to fight for territories. They fight other guilds, they fight for power all the time. But there are other players. that actually want to roleplay. They want to become a gatherer, or they want to become a merchant. And while they like some PvP, they don't want to be ganged by and zerged by massive guilds all the time. How can we build a world that caters to both types of players? And one of the ways we do that is basically we introduce the lawless continent, the Outlands. These are the areas where the king's power is not strong enough to hold up any law. This is where the huge guilds can fight each other and struggle for power. And this is also the home of the most precious resources. And on the other hand, we have the royal continents. And the royal continents, there's still the king still has some power. So there is still a law in place. So if you want to become a murderer and if you kill other people, you can still do that, but you will have to face the consequences. If you do that too often, eventually the royal cities will not allow you to go back in. We'll introduce the reputation system, which will come with the next beta phase. And in order for this to work, we actually need to rebuild the world and separate it in these areas. The team has grown a lot because actually creating this entire new world, which will be roughly double in size of what you know right now from Albion. We are now 3 times as many artists and 3 times as many level designers as we were at Summer Alpha. So we really got up to speed. But again, building this world entirely new is a huge challenge, and we're all very busy with that right now.
My name is Markus Koch and I'm art director for Albion Online. I create the visual feeling, the look and feel for the project. I create the inspiration for characters, for the world in general, and from there we give it to a lot of artists to actually create the whole thing. For a very long time in the past, we were restricted to a very limited amount of zones, and suddenly we actually have the chance to explore a world which feels much more alive than in the past, where we were restricted to a very limited amount of different biomes. Right now, we can actually really step deeper into it. A swamp will look like a swamp, will feel like a swamp. You will actually explore nature, plants, animals. Here you can see how I'm working on an overpaint for the new biome, which is the steppe. Currently, I'm defining the color approach for 3 different danger zones, which is green, red, and dead zones.
My name is Max, and I'm a level designer at Albion Online. I increased world size for us. What's important to me as a developer, but also as a player, is a map that changes. I want a world that lives. What makes the new world unique compared to the old one is that we have a lot of different biomes. We have tried to make more diversity by not having only diversify the world in low, medium and high in terms of PvP, but actually having different types of land. It means that we have different sets and different rules for different areas. It means that the world is more local. Different guilds can live in different biomes and have a special resource that they trade with other guilds. The difference now with resource system is that resources have a way of spawning randomly, so if you know that they will spawn in a special way, they will do that maybe for a certain amount of time, but in the future they might be different. This means that your guild might learn how they spawn right now and benefit from this. The template system is essentially a system which allows us to build the world faster. We split it down in several parts and use these parts over and over, but we also have layers, which means that we can have more uniqueness in one template. For example, a template could be a forest, but you don't want the forest to always look the same. So in some versions you have a village, and in other versions you have a destroyed village, maybe you have ruins or even difference in gameplay such as monsters.
Since the world of Albion is mainly a functional one, right? We have a player-driven economy. We need to make sure that everything works out. For example, that we do have enough wood on the continent and that we have enough resources that can cater to each other. So that means lots of planning. So first step is actually everybody sitting down and rebuilding the world. We did that first on paper, and really like shifting around biomes, shifting around cities, looking at the distances until we had something where we were quite happy with. And that kind of mandates how many maps we actually need to build and how many maps we need to build of each tier and of each biome.
The new world of Albion Online will be awesome because it will be so much more to explore than in the past.
One of the things that we want to achieve with the new world is that it actually matters where in the game world I am.
It's a very cool thing to build a world. It's something that most people don't get to do.
We are going really wide and exploring the world for different places, and you will actually really feel like a pioneer in a new world.
Hello and welcome. My name is Robin Henkes. I'm the game director of Albion Online, and I have the very distinct honor today to host Peter Newman, the author of our very first Albion Online novel. Yes, we've been working on a novel in which we hope to expand the lore of the world and give you an insight into in more detail into the factions and what makes the world of Albion go. We chose Peter for this task because we really liked his work. He has had his debut novel, The Vagrant, coming out earlier this year.
Yeah, that's right. It came out the end of April.
And you've already secured a sequel?
Yeah, so the sequel is out April next year, and they've literally just signed me up for the third book in the series. So I'm feeling really quite happy with life at the moment.
Very good, very cool. So we're very happy to have secured Peter to work on our book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, actually?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the challenges of writing an Albion book is that Albion as a game doesn't follow a standard fantasy narrative. There is not one overarching story, one great evil that has to be fought and then everything goes back to normal. It is a game that, of course, that has hundreds and hundreds of stories and that the players are all making their own. So when I was writing the book, what felt natural to me was to take a group of characters who are in the shoes of the players, experiencing Albion as the players would and going on journeys, 3 different journeys, but as the players would experience them.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the journeys that they do experience?
Yeah, certainly. So I should probably mention a little bit about the characters as well. So there's 3 principal characters, and each of them have a kind of a subcast around them. And all of these characters are either running away from something from their old life, or they're reaching out for something in a new life. So the first of these characters is called Tia, and she has had a pretty tough life in the old world. She didn't really like that life. She's made a lot of mistakes and enemies, and for her, going to Albion is a chance for a fresh start and to be a better person than she was. And also a chance, not just for her, but for her family. And she wants to make them better people too, and they aren't always in agreement. They maybe feel they're fine as they are, but it's quite keen for her to make a difference in their lives too. And then you've got a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and he has been thrown out of the Navy basically for things that he's done. And he's in a very different situation. He was quite happy in his old life, but now he's been forced to make a new one, and he doesn't really know who he's going to be yet. And there are a lot of forces at play on him, like his father, for example, and other groups who are trying to lead him down paths that maybe don't suit him. That he's kind of reluctantly following it, but he's got pulls to go in different directions. And then lastly, we've got Prince Randall, who is actually being hunted. He has done some things he shouldn't have done. He's being hunted down by the Royal Army, and he has fled to Albion, but quite deliberately. He's got an agenda, he's got plans, and he's trying to unravel some of the mysteries of Albion.
Okay. So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about what kind of things these characters do throughout the story? Who do they encounter?
Right, okay, so again, I was trying to capture the player experience here. So one of the first challenges that they have is actually they've arrived with nothing. Mm-hmm. So how are they going to even survive their first few days? So getting their hands on, you know, critical tools, equipment, a place to shelter, all of that kind of stuff. Also making their first alliances, because one of the things in Albion, of course, is that for the majority of players, they won't play alone, they'll play in guilds, and each of those guilds will have an identity and will have a role in the world. And for the characters, it's finding that role. For some characters, they might be joining guilds. Which guild are they going to join? For other characters, they want to make their own path and make their own guild, and that has its own challenges. How do you convince people to join you? What are you going to do? So there's that side of things. But of course, there's also exploring Albion. Mm-hmm. And it's a mysterious place. It's also a dangerous place. How are you going to survive? And Albion, what's cool about Albion, of course, is that it has its own groups that exist already within that world. When you're reading about the protagonists in the book, I want it to feel like you're watching a player kind of go through the game. And that if I played Albion and then I read the book, that it feels familiar. Like, oh yeah, I remember that kind of thing happening to me. And I remember the first time I did that for myself. Obviously, at the same time, we want to tell a compelling story and make it fun and all that. But yes, to capture that spirit of Albion in the book, both in terms of what they experience, but also what does the world feel like? How is it, you know, the locations they go to, the kind of enemies they have to face, and the kind of challenges they have to get past.
So what was your inspiration for writing the story? I mean, obviously we came to you and said, this is the world of Albion, this is how it works, these are the factions that live there. But what was the point where you decided, okay, this is the story that I'm going to tell? What was the inspirational?
Well, there were lots of inspirations, really. So one thing is, yeah, you had all this material. So I'm looking at all of the factions, and some of them are sparking ideas in my head. And also that you have a certain level of detail for these things to exist for a game. But then for writing a novel about it, you need to go much deeper to really understand, you know, what is the history of all of these groups? What is the history of Albion itself? How have all these things interacted in the past? And why do they do these things? So there was all of that side of things. It's a bit like if someone gives you half a jigsaw and says, make the other half.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we had lots of ideas and we had some of that written down, but you really had to pull it all together and...
Yeah, so making a coherent narrative so if you come up with an idea for one faction's background, how's that going to impact on the other faction?
Yeah.
And what have they all, you know, they haven't been existing in vacuums for the last 1,000 years. They've been either making friends with each other, fighting each other, drawing up lines and saying, well, don't cross that, and of course someone will cross that, and then what happens? So yeah, all of that was a lot of fun. And going back to that kind of jigsaw idea, so you have like a jigsaw piece where half of it is quite defined, because it has to fit with this. But the other three sides, you can do anything you want with. But at some point, they've got to meet up with this other bit of the jigsaw over here. And actually, in some ways, that's quite liberating, because what you quickly come to is an option where actually there are only three really cool options here. Which one do I like the most? Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it kind of focuses the writing, makes it easier. One of the joys of this project was that you said to me, would you like to play the alpha? And I said, yes, please, I do want to play it. And the two sides of that really, that my own play experience was really exciting and gave me a lot of ideas for the book. But also the community playing the alpha, because Albion's got a very active community that talk to each other and that get involved and that try to do really cool things en masse as groups. And yeah, that inspired me in and of itself.
One of the things we gave you as part of the task also was that we gave you a list of player names who had achieved something throughout the alpha, right? And we basically said these are people we've noted from the community, and we thought it'd be cool if they could have a part in the book.
Yeah, so this is one of the coolest things, because I didn't want there to be a book over here and a game over there. I like the idea that if you're going to do a multimedia thing, that they relate and they mesh with each other. So yeah, this idea that you've got people in the alpha who have in some way distinguished themselves, either by something really hilarious or embarrassing or by being brilliant. The idea that some of these deeds, these legendary deeds, can get into the book is brilliant. So yeah, there are people who are characters from the alpha game that will be in the book, either as characters that interact with the book characters, or as people who were just mentioned in passing, like, wow, did you hear about this guy? And I love that. I love that idea. And that these two things relate. And also that things in the book may well come in some form to exist in the game, whether that's just like a cool piece of kit that you can get for your own character as well. So that relationship is something that really, really excites me.
So would you say it's fair to say that the community has driven the book?
To a degree, yeah, because some of the things that they've done and got excited about are going in there. And so, and bits of the community exist in the book, quite literally.
Yeah.
So.
I think I'm really excited about that part as well, because that's something I would love to look into for future projects, to expand this aspect more, to involve the community more.
Yeah, totally. So this idea that so if we think about the book is set, if you like, in a way around the alpha time. It's set, say, a few months before the players will start playing the game when the game finally launches. So I really like the idea that that what people do in the beta now could be starting to form the stories of future Albion novels.
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously observe the beta closely and look for opportunities. Then we'll watch closely as the novel launches. We'll see how well it's received, and obviously look into further expanding the narrative and the world of Albion.
Yeah.
Is there a particular aspect of the lore that fascinates you that you would like to expand on beyond the novel?
Yes, totally. So one of the things about this book, is looking at making your mark, setting up maybe your initial guild experiences and also guild trials, and how do you get your own land in Albion? And then what I'd like to explore further is, okay, let's imagine for a lot of players, they will establish themselves, and that's all very well, but then how do you hold on to what you've got? And how do you expand on what you've got? And maybe it's okay in the short term for guilds maybe to exist side by side, but then there comes a point maybe where you want that, or they've expanded into an area that's going to stop your expansion. And that relationship of kind of betrayal and alliance is something that I think is really cool.
Yep. And I mean, there is also the opportunity to explore into the even deeper mysteries of Albion.
Yes. So that's the other thing, is kind of some of the factions within Albion have really ancient rivalries and histories. And there are things about why the world it is, and maybe also some things which are mysteries that would be better for Albion if they were never unlocked. That of course the players are going to unlock, because that's fun. And looking at that in future stories would be great as well.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
You can get Peter's novel at the beginning of the next year. Look forward to it. We're very excited about it. Hello, my name is Robin Henkes. I'm the game director for Albion Online, and today it's time for another Albion Online development recap. The team has been very busy analyzing the results of the Galahad test and the restart of beta, and overall we're really happy with the results. One particular thing we've been looking at are the outlands. Now, as you remember, the outlands are one of the reasons why we actually pushed back the launch of Albion Online and why we did want to run another test, because we felt that the previous iteration didn't offer enough action and hotspots and didn't quite fulfill the goals that we had set. So this has been on our minds quite closely, and we've been monitoring the situation. And to our satisfaction, a lot of our goals were achieved. We saw a lot of cool action in the PvP hotspots themselves, in the home bases in the center. We see some really good guild distribution. We have the stronger guilds towards the higher outlands, and a good mixture of other guilds in the other section of the outlines, and so on. So a lot of goals were achieved, but we also found that some problems remain, and some new problems have cropped up. So let me get into that for a moment. One thing that we weren't happy with were the outland cities. The outland cities were supposed to provide a base of operations for guilds that don't own a territory, but want to engage in outland play, and for players who've been excluded from the Royal Continent for their PvP actions. And we felt these do not work well because of their poor access to activities, their locations in the outlands themselves, and the limited access to crafted goods. Basically, you can't run an operation on a market where you don't have access to all kinds of items unless you're crafting everything yourself. But if you're one of those guilds that crafts everything yourself, you're probably a territory guild. So this didn't really work for the not so big guilds. The other part that we're still looking at is the combat in the Outlands. As you know, fighting in the Outland requires quite large groups that you often refer to as zergs. And this is not something that we're ever comfortable with in Albion Online. We don't like to see an entire section of the game given over to just who brings the most players. So we're looking into ways to maintain some really good large fights because we think they work well, like castle fights and so on, but also enable smaller groups of players to run in the Outlands without always fearing to be crushed by just these large groups of players running around. So in general, we try to bring changes to the Outlands that maintain the DNA as a lawless zone where it's everyone against everyone, but that allow us to increase activity so that there is more action for everyone. And the way we want to go about this is twofold. One, we want to look at the city situation and create, instead of multiple cities, a single central hub for player activity for players that are not part of territory guilds. And we want to change the rules in the Outlands in ways and change the balancing of the game in ways that encourages more players of different varieties to come into the Outlands and engage with Outland gameplay of all sorts. And we'll get into that in detail now. So let's start with the creation of a single player hub. What we want to do is to actually remove all cities from the Outlands themselves. So if you have goods there in the markets or in the banks, you might want to evacuate those before this update, this change which comes with Hector hits the servers. And the same goes for the harbors. We feel that the harbors, the way that they're placed, don't really work well as an all-round access for the Outlands, so we'll be removing those from both the Outlands and the Royal Continent. The only shipping routes that will be remaining will be between the starting towns on the Royal Continent. And we'll be replacing this with a central portal in the city of Callian. So Callian is located at the center of the Royal Continent in the middle of the PvP zone. And you'll find a huge gate there that you can use to jump to Outland exits. Outland exits will be placed in new regions that are created in the locations of the harbors, and there'll be a few more portals in other positions in the Outlands as well. All in all, each section of the Outland will have 4 of those exits, and these exits will actually be of a particular type for each section of the Outlands. So the high Outlands will get, let's say a red-coded exit type, the medium will get a yellow-coded type, and the low will get a green. We haven't quite decided on the color codes yet, but let's go with that example. So what you can do with this portal in Callian is you can interact with it, and you can choose the exit that you want to come out. So you can go anywhere in the Outlands. However, traveling this way to a particular exit, it doesn't cost you anything, but it will bind you. It will bind you in 2 ways. The first way is that you will be bound for a time that we're still deciding on, but probably 10 minutes, to that particular exit that you travel to. So if you've traveled to the northeastern exit in the high Outlands, you can only go back and forth between that and the city of Callian for 10 minutes. You cannot travel to any of the other locations. And in addition, you will also be bound to the section of the Outlands. So you'll, for example, if it's high and the color is red, you'll be bound to red types of exit for a longer time. This is about 2 hours that we're looking at. What this does is it limits how guilds can project their force in the Outlands while still allowing Callian to function as a hub that allows access to any part of the Outland for players who want to base themselves there and want to run activities from there. And we feel this is a really good compromise between the ability to have a hub that enables you to engage with everything, and at the same time limiting the ability of guilds to just call for help to go anywhere at any point in time. From a visual and narrative perspective, the portal will be really, really cool. The narrative is that these portals were created at the high time of King Arthur's realm, so the ancient Albion, where before the cataclysmic war and the breakdown of the alliance, he commissioned Morgana to build this portal to reach the furthest reaches of his realm. And you'll see this reflected in the architecture. You can see the beauty of old Albion still in these exits, and we'll really make sure that it feels epic to travel to a certain section of the Outlands and leave the ancient ruined exit and travel from there. So we really think this can give a really strong identity to the city of Carleon, and it solves the problem of guilds and players not finding good access to the Outlands. Apart from making Carleon the hub, which has all sorts of effects on trade and on, as I said, guild activity, we still think that the Outlands themselves need to be more attractive, and this is what our second part of changes is about. One is, as you know, we've been testing the viability of enabling the anti-Zerg display that is displaying groups of more than 10 players on the minimap for everyone to see in the Outlands. The theory that we have come up with is that enabling this will create more balanced fights and will allow smaller groups to enter the Outlands without so much fear of being just crushed by large groups, and therefore in general increase activity and actually increase the quality of fights, because the engagements will be more close in general, while at the same time not interfering too much with large guild action, because you have various tactical ways to play around the display limitation. But by the time this video comes out, we'll probably have seen the first conclusions, and we'll be making a call of whether this feature remains enabled or not. And we'll strictly base that on the data that we collect during the testing phase. In addition, we feel it's important to increase the not only the attractiveness by controlling the risk, but also by improving the reward. So there are two changes coming to the rewards. One is we'll be increasing the resources amounts found in low and medium high outlands to make sure that they are always better than staying on the Royal Continent. Right now, we had lowered the low outlands reward level to a point where some people were claiming they weren't valuable enough, and actually the density of resources was quite low, so that will be all the same across all the outlands. You'll find the same amounts of T6, T7 and T8 respectively in each sections of the outland, but we'll be introducing something new, and that is the rarity or enchantment level of a region. So basically in each section of the outlands there'll be an increased rate of enchanted resources, and that rate will be highest in the high section and significantly higher than in the others. So this means that gatherers are highly incentivized to go to those sections to collect the resources, because they have a really good chance of getting, those level 3, level 2 enchantments. And it at the same time doesn't it basically adds more power to the resources found here, and creates a really strong drive effectively to go there. Finally, a large change that we're doing to make the GVG in Outlands much more attractive is that we're tweaking the way that resources and territories work. So we'll basically be taking all the T8 out of the world and redistributing it into guild watchtower territories. So the only place you can find T8 from now on is inside of watchtower territories. Now that means you can raid those because they don't have a permanent boundary, but obviously the guild controlling it will be at an advantage because guards will be protecting those resources. The other change is that we'll be respawning these resources always at the beginning of the main GVG time of that watchtower territory. So that means while you cannot harvest the resources during a fight, immediately after the fight, or if there's no fight happening, immediately at that time, you can begin to harvest those resources. And that creates a really strong incentive to raid other people's watchtowers, and at the same time for guilds it creates a strong incentive to keep their gatherers and fighters together, to go to their own territories, to collect those high-end resources and bring them back to their bases. And we really think that adds a really cool and strong pull to own watchtower territories. That is the current set of changes we are hoping to bring to Albion, to the Outlands in Albion before the launch of the game. We're really excited about this. We really feel we're closing in on a really good version on the Outlands, where we'll have lots of activity, lots of action, and exciting GVG moments. And you can look forward to those changes coming in Hector.
So I'm Florian Bodenschatz and I'm the sound designer for Albion Online. Why I got interested in game audio or game sound design was for me the combination of me being very interested on the one hand in everything that's audio, music and sound, on the other hand being a big fan of video games and playing games myself. So composition is the music that you're gonna hear in the game, and sound design is any other thing that you're gonna hear besides music. So that's environment sounds like wind and water and birds, and also everything that is like combat, like swords and spells and magic. The challenge for the sound design for video games is that every situation is interactive, it's adaptive. So all the sound effects need to be prepared so they can react on whatever the play is doing in any moment. So be it the environment or your sword sound or your footstep sound, it's all gonna react to what you're actually doing and where you actually are.
You worked your in that.
When you design sounds, you want to capture the essence of what you're trying to score. So if you have a monster, you really want to try to get the essence of that monster, his character. So we met some time ago, and the goal was to provide really good sound for Albion. And we decided to completely overhaul the whole system. We switched the audio engine underneath, and this meant to really rework everything. And the new engine provides the ability to make really improvements in the sound. And now we have way more possibilities to avoid repetitiveness and to add much more variety to the sound. And sound can really bring the player or immerse the player much more into the game, and we can achieve this now by adding much more detail and much more interactivity and adaptiveness to every sound. So one of the most trickiest parts of the sound design in Albion, one of the challenges, is the spell and combat system. We have like really hundreds, I think like 500, 600 spells. So you will not only see which weapon, which character you are, to which character you have developed to, or which character you are developing, but you will also hear that. This way we kind of translated the very main motto of Albion Online, you are what you wear, onto the sound field, a sound design area, and you will also hear what you wear. So our footsteps will be showing that which armor are you wearing. Is it a plate armor? Is it a leather armor? And also on which surface are you walking. So is this a wood surface? Is it sand? Is it grass? You will know where am I and where's the monster coming. Is he coming out of the water? Is he coming out of the grass? And that is what sound can provide. It can really drag you into this world and make you believe that you are in this world. The equipment that I use is basically some microphones to gather all the sounds. And so that's on the one hand some field recording mics that you can use. You can go out and take samples. The actual horse footstep sounds are really from real horses, so they were really captured on all these different surfaces, being walking on grass, on rock, gravel, wood, and all these kinds of stuff. And so what you're hearing are real horse sounds. The most fun in the sound effects for Albion for me are the mobs, because that's where I'm gonna stand in front of a microphone. We also have like female actors. We also have a lot of team members actually screaming, talking, or whatever into the microphone. And also we try to make a really good mix. So we had sound standing out here and there, and this will be the small improvements. And in the second step, which will be on the next release, we're gonna really extend the whole sound scheme. So you will get into all these areas that still don't have sound in Albion. You will get sound. And also all of the sound areas are also polished, because we have now much more possibilities with the new audio engine.
Hello and welcome, Albion community, to another Albion Online development recap. My name is Robin Henkes, Game Director, and today things are really heating up in the office, where everyone's very busy working on the next release, the Galahad update. And I thought we'd take the opportunity to talk about something that was actually key to making the decision to produce this update, which is the rework of the Outlands. It's something we mentioned a couple of months ago and that we have been quite quiet about recently, but it's actually the centerpiece of why we are reworking the world of Albion as we are right now. So the Outlands is the place where guilds settle, where guilds have their massive fights, where the wars happen, where actually a lot of what makes Albion special happens. And this is why it's been, a centerpiece of our attention. And of your attention as well. We've been getting a lot of feedback. We got a lot of feedback after Beta 1, and we got a lot of feedback after the launch of Final Beta in August. And the key feedback there was, in Beta 1, the Outlands were really a centerpiece of attention. They were a hectic fighting zone. We had a lot of intense guild battles. They were very small and very compact, and this forced these fights. The downside of that was that these areas were dominated by extremely strong guilds that basically were able to control the entire area and pretty much left no room for anyone who wasn't, you know, quite at the top level. So from these experiences, we reworked the high-end zones, the outlands, in the next phase of beta, and the result was what you're playing right now. A very large area for the guilds with lots of room, separated by time zones in a circle, and our idea was this would be a place where you know where the less strong guilds would also find a location to settle, and where the individual players of the guilds would also occasionally find a place that wasn't that competitive, where they wouldn't immediately get killed by large groups of people roaming the map. And this turned out to be true. However, we also saw a decline in massive guild action. We saw basically that some weak guilds were forced to settle next to strong guilds because of the time zones. We saw that those guilds were quickly getting eliminated, and then the strong guilds had very little competition, and there was in general a lack of hotspots of places to fight over. So when we had to make the decision whether we would launch Albion or not, we had to make this call. Were we happy with the layout of the world? Was it doing what we hoped it would do? And our answer was no. We wanted to basically take the best things from beta 1 and the best things from the final beta to really deliver the launch version. And that's what we're building right now. That's the new design of the Outlands. So how does that work? Well, we wanted to create dedicated hotspots, places where there would always be a competition, and you could basically always pick a fight because there was always a reason to be there. And at the same time, we wanted to create places where individual players could go together without always fearing competition, and places where you could somewhat safely travel. And the result is that the new Outland design. If we take a look at the map, the Outlands are separated into 3 different areas. We have the high Outlands. This is the place with the highest value resources. Then we have the medium section and the low section. And the medium and low section are separated by, again, having different values of resources. So by values, I generally mean density. You will still find high-end resources in the lower Outlands, but their density is much lower than in the higher Outlands. So with this design, what we want to achieve is that the strong players, the really strong guilds, the large alliances, they settle in the high Outlands because this is where they can compete with the highest end gear. This is where they have access to the highest end resources. And at the same time, at the lower end Outlands, we have room for beginning guilds to settle, to get to know the world of GVG and the world of territory building. And they hopefully do not face such strong competition because the lands around them are not extremely valuable. There's still valuable resources to be found, but it is harder to equip a team in strong gear sets in these areas simply because there's fewer resources of high tiers available. The Outlands themselves are connected to the Royal Continent in different locations, and every section of the Outlands is connected from a different place in the Royal Continent. This guarantees that you can't use the Royal Continent to shortcut to get to a different section, so the people settling in the higher section can't really terrorize the people in the lower section. And at the same time, the people from the lower section cannot easily move into the higher section to take its resources and then safely retreat back to their bases. So there's a certain degree of separation, but all of them have pretty easy access to Royal Continent, which allows them to import resources from there, low-end resources. It also allows them to export their high-end resources, and it allows the recruitment of new players into your guilds. one of our big hopes of this new high-level outland design is that it allows us to better deal with different player numbers. Let's presume that we've misjudged how many players are coming and there's a high demand for more room in the outlands. Well, then we can just continue this pattern. We can basically, add a new area that we consider high next to the high area, and we can consider a new area medium next to the medium area, and so on. But if we've misjudged how many players are coming and we're on a generous side, there's too much land, then this design should force a certain level of competition, because people will, if there is no one settling in high, obviously people will move to high, because this is the place where you have the easiest access to resources. And then, if you're, if medium is not quite full, then people will settle there, and eventually low will be pretty much empty. Obviously, this is not what we expect. We've made some, based on previous tests, we've made some assumptions about how many players are coming, but we really think this this design helps us to deal flexibly with the various, with differences in player numbers. One last thing to say about the high-level design is that we've generally reduced the number of cities in the outlands. The outlands are mostly about territorial warfare, but the fact that there is now fewer cities, but there are in key strategic locations in between different zones of the outlands, means that these cities should be much more lively. You should not have the feeling of empty towns. These should actually be thriving trade locations in the outlands, and they're key to providing food to the guilds in the outlands. They're key to providing market and all sorts of forms of trades and exchanges. So maybe let's look at one of these sections of the outlands in detail. Let's zoom in on the high end outland arena. What you can see is at the outer ring of such an area are the home territories of the guilds. This is where we still have one territory per region. So if you are controlling this, you should be you should have a pretty comfortable way of defending your home. You still have access to a farm territory pretty much immediately, and you actually only have one main route into this region. There is a secondary one, but it's through a passage. That's a system or a pattern we've been experimenting with. It's basically an underground path into the neighboring region, which is a bit more interesting in terms of PvE because in terms of PvP, because it has a bunch of choke points. It has a couple of resources, so it's quite an interesting feature for guilds to deal with, to plan with. That there's basically two main ways out of a cluster. If we look at the rest, at the arena as a whole, we see that all biomes are present, and we see that the time zones go all the way around the clock. So you have basically you have an incentive for people from all different time zones to settle in this region. That is something that was very important to us, because this allows competitors from all over the globe to meet in the same highest end arena in the outlands. Just to avoid confusion, when we're talking about outland arenas, what I mean is that each section of the outlands is designed with sort of a feeling of a designed battleground in mind. It's a group of regions that is designed to fulfill a certain purpose. So an outland arena is the whole set of regions with the high value ones in the center and the guild territories to the outside. You can also see how we've tried to create this constant action hotspot. The center area of the highest end part of the outland is really full of strong incentives to go there. First off, we have what we call a home base. So right at the center, we have a location where you will find the raid level PvE, where you'll find regularly spawning world bosses that have really strong loot. And you'll find really strong resource harvesting opportunities right at the center. Not only do you have the highest value resources there, so your T8 and your T7 there, but you also have really high quantities of T6. So any gatherer who really wants to have an easy time of gathering these resources will go there. Then you have the castles in the center, so they will still be on a weekly timer, and them being right in the center of the arena also forces the fight, and it makes it interesting because the castles are not actually that far from each other. So at the time where the fights are happening, you're going to have to make a decision how to split your forces if you want to try to control both castles, for example. We've also spread things like chests in a way in the arena that allows for different levels of competition. So the more frequent chests are towards the center of the arena, whereas the more rare chests, the daily chests are a bit more to the outside. This is to guarantee or to ensure that there's some action that is restricted to your time zone, that not all the action in the arena is always for everyone at full force, but so that you have an opportunity for a little bit of smaller scale PvP at the outside. And finally, we have some clusters that don't really offer a lot of special features right next to the guild's home territories. This is a space where typically you wouldn't encounter that much competition. There are not that many fights. There's just some basic mob camps here. The bigger dungeons are further to the inside, and the more valuable dungeons again are more further to the inside. But if you're just looking for some solo or small scale PvE, you should be looking right next to your guild's home territory. There's a lot more features we could be talking about. There's strategic resource locations that are also placed towards the center of these arenas. Again, another feature that reinforces the notion that these places are where the action will be at, where your guild really needs to ensure that it takes control of these regions while you're want to take advantage of these special places. So I hope we've given you an idea of how the new Outland design works, and I hope you're as excited about finding out how it works as we are. We're not too far from the next update now. We'll have an announcement on that pretty soon. So I hope to see you online, and until next time. Hello and welcome, Albion community, to another development recap. My name is Robin Henkes, and today I'd like to present to you something we've been working on for quite a while, the changes to cities, namely the player cities, the places where players can build up their own estates, where they can have their own business, and where they go to trade or buy an island. So why did we decide to invest into these cities? Well, the cities are centerpieces of gameplay in Albion. Players gather there, and basically you always find players in cities. And we felt that the lack of uniqueness, the lack of interesting differences in cities was making the game weaker. It was not rewarding you for traveling, not rewarding you for exploring, and just didn't give you the feeling of a living fantasy world. So this is something that we wanted to change. And we set out to give every city a new look and feel, and even a unique layout that would reflect its place in the environment. As you know, every city is located near a specific biome. So basically in the surrounding lands you have particular resources. In the forest you have woods, in the mountains you have a lot of ore and rocks and so on. And we wanted the cities to reflect this. So as we said about, one of the key thoughts was how do we get the idea and the resources of a biome into the cities? So for example, in the mountains, we decided the city would be a city on a mountain slope. So you have a deep view into the valley, and you have these houses stacked up on the cliff, and you really get a feeling of a harsh environment. In the swamp city, you have a city that is built on an ancient ruin, half sunken into the swamp, and it's actually almost in a lake, and there's a lot of canals and you know, this Venice-like feeling of small bridges over pieces of water, and it reflects the wet nature of this biome. The steppe city is basically, it feels like a Western frontier town. It's a place where you can really imagine the trade caravans making a halt from the harsh conditions of the steppes around them, resting, you know, stocking up on water, and getting some good trades before moving on. The forest city. The forest city invokes the feeling of an old castle. The entire town is built on an old castle overgrown with massive trees, and nature has basically claimed this place back. And now that the royal forces have come to establish some form of order in Albion, they've rebuilt part of it, and now it's a thriving little forest town surrounded by lumber camps and other craftsmen, and the shops that the players set up themselves. The Highland city is yet different again. We have a city on a hill where you can go up and down in all directions, and you really get the feeling of a town set on, you know, an old, what you can imagine to be an old keeper site. And this is actually something that we reflected in the architecture. It's a very defensible place. They made sure that they're protected from attacks from the keepers, and maybe you can even see the signs of an occasional keeper attack who are trying to take back what they consider their holy ground. So apart from the biome cities, we also have one particular city that will be completely unique in the world, and that is the town in the center of the royal continent. And this town is, in the lore, it's the ruins of old Camelot. It's the place where destiny or history was made in Albion, where the old catastrophe happened. It was the fortress of the old kings, and thousands of years ago, it was besieged by Morgana, and then in one cataclysmic event, all life in the town stopped, and now it's surrounded by undead and all sorts of vile creatures. But the royal forces have taken the fortress itself back and turned it into a trading place. And it's one of the wildest places in Albion because it's in the middle of the red zone, so it's in a place where it's least controlled by the royal forces. So it has a feeling of, you know, a thriving market, more driven by the interest of traders and smugglers and all sorts of questionable people than to be in tight control of the king. A key feature of the center city are the tunnels underneath. It has all sorts of, it's built on a massive rock, and that rock has been mined out in the ages before, and there are, you know, lots of secret passages that you can use to sneak out and into the city. So it really plays with this idea of this, you know, underground city kind of. So we really think that these new cities will bring a lot to the world of Albion. They'll make every experience unique in a way. Every player who decides to live in a different city will have a completely different feeling of living in that city. And when you travel, you will get to encounter these places. You can see all these changes coming soon in the upcoming Galahad update, and I hope you'll enjoy them as much as we do. Goodbye.
Welcome everyone to this week's development recap. My name is Dominik Muller and I'm one of the level designers for Albion Online. Over the last few weeks you've heard often that we are doing a big world rework, and there were many things hinted at. For example, we talked about home bases, we talked about camps, dungeons, mob camps, altars, resource landmarks and passages. All these things we are doing to make the world more immersive, more believable, to give it a story, to tell the characteristic of all the factions who live in this world. Today I want to talk about a few things we've recently finished, and these things would be talking about camps, dungeons and mob camps, and also the home bases. If you look at the regions we have right now in the world, they all look kind of the same. They all cater to every need you have. They have mob camps in them and dungeons. A quest giver is always there. So there's a lot of them, but they don't feel that unique. The new world we are creating has a lot less of these regions, but therefore they're a lot more unique. They get their own reason to be. A few of these clusters will have now mob camps, and a few others will only have dungeons. In these mob camps, we normally found dungeons at the end of it, so you would go through the whole mob camp, fight your way through all these mobs, and then in the end there was another dungeon where you would fight through the whole dungeon, and then at that end there would be a mini-boss or not if somebody else was faster than you. We didn't like that too much. What we want the player to experience actually is to get this feeling of actually finishing something. So after going through this mob camp, instead of a normal dungeon, you will have now a short dungeon. It's like a cherry on top after finishing and grinding through this whole place. You will immediately find your mini-boss. It will be a very nicely designed underground tiny dungeon that actually fits to the mob camp above. But we didn't want to get rid of our underground dungeons because honestly they were really cool. So what we want to do in the cases when we don't have overground mob camps, to have larger dungeons underneath the earth. They are not as linear as they used to be. They are more sandboxy. They are kind of giant where you can go left and right and up and down, and you can find many things in there. You can find mini-bosses and even bosses sometimes. These are spots where you can go with friends and have groups running around in there, not just one but many, which will even increase the PvE again and the PvP. Additionally to these changes to mob camps and dungeons, we also wanted to give the overworld, all our regions, like a bit of dash of variety more to it, and we achieved that by doing our little random camps, or camps as we are called. If you remember, we talked about them. They are small scenes where off the streets in every region, where you walk into the forest and suddenly you see there stone circles surrounded by keeper druids, for example. We've now finished this concept, and we've created a lot of smaller scenarios which actually narrate on the characteristic of each of these factions. So you'll find things, for example, in the heretics. It's kind of usual to find a small camp where you have a small bandits waiting there or talking to each other, or a small hunter camp with heretics. But within these camps, you also have the opportunity or the possibility to find something rather strange or really rare. For example, we made it an heretic ambush. You just walk through the world and suddenly you can see 2 large stones with like a really badly made trap in between these 2 stones and a few heretics giggling behind that and obviously showing you the big reward. You can see like how crazy the heretics are in this situation, how weird they are and how they try to actually lure you into this weird trap. Or for example, for the Morganas, you have your normal war camps where you can see some field bats and encounter a few soldiers. But you can also encounter a really rare camp where they're just trying to summon a demon. And yeah, I think it was already mentioned, but I want to emphasize this again. Each of these camps has the opportunity to spawn different combinations of mobs as well. One day you just might find your normal mobs, like a few soldiers and a few archers. But on the next day, in a similar camp, you might actually find an archer and his superior, like an archer boss. And killing him alone might be quite challenging, but also rewarding. With these random camps, we offer you to find your own stories, to reward exploration. We want you to go out into the world and find these special locations, to find these cool rewards. We want you to venture out there and just have these chance to make your day. The last point I want to talk about are the home bases. You all know we want to make the world more believable, more immersive. And you also know that we want to introduce things you can see on your world map. We've talked about passages and seeing big mountains and lakes. And one of the things you want to see there as well are home bases. We have so many factions in our world already. We have heretics, we have keepers, undead, and Morgana. But what we haven't had yet so far is we never showed where they come from or where their home is, hence the home bases. For example, for the undeads, we created a massive, old, lying in ruin monastery. You have to imagine each of these home bases tell their own little story and show you where these factions come from. If you look at the undeads, the story is this massive monastery lying in the middle of the massive cluster. And one day there was an attack on this monastery during the massive war in Albion. A giant spell was casted and everybody died immediately, leaving corpses behind everywhere, everything in ruin. Now, a few thousand years later, you as the player actually enter this cluster and can see the destruction. You can see how life stopped immediately. Time didn't continue from this point on. In these home bases, we cater to all your grinders out there. You will have single-player content, you have group-player content, and even raid content. The further you go from the outside to the inside of the cluster, you can go from single-player content to group to raid content. Let's try to imagine that. If you enter this region, from the outside you will see these small farms and villages where people just die doing their daily work. These are your single-player mobs. You can just go through there, see the stories, and just grind a bit. The deeper you venture into the monastery, behind the big walls, you can actually see the life that was inside of the monastery. You can see a herb garden, you can see the military camp inside of this religious building, you can see the brewery, you can see these sort of things. And in that you will have your group content. You will find your small mini-bosses, you will find your bosses within these small stories and houses. You can fight your way through all of this ruin, of this destruction. Everything is broken down and nature is coming back and trying to grow over everything. But the deeper you venture into this monastery, you can see that the nature isn't stronger than the death that was done in this particular location. You can see that nature is getting weaker and weaker and more broken down, more dark, more rotten. In the very center of our monastery, you have a cathedral, you have a graveyard, you have a crypt. And this is our raid content. Inside this raid content, you will also find two really cool things, and that's a daily boss and a weekly boss. The daily boss will obviously be there every day, but the weekly boss will be a globally announced event, so everybody will know when it will happen. This will improve the PvE and also the PvP. Guilds will gather and just run there and try to get the first shot at this raid boss. But don't fret. I mean, the world boss will not be there in only just one time zone, but it will shift over time. So one time it will be at 3 a.m., next time it will be at 2 p.m., and so on and so forth. So everybody gets a shot at this world boss. As you can see, over the last few weeks and months, we've worked dramatically onto increasing the immersiveness and the feel and the characteristic of Albion to make the open world really nice and worth exploring. And we continue to do so. In the future, we will introduce a lot more camps, more of these tiny dungeons in the mob camps. They will all be more varied and more unique. And yeah, that is what I wanted to tell you today, and I wish you a good day. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Dev Recap. My name is Michael Schwan and I'm one of Albion Online's game designers, and I want to talk to you today about combat improvements and adjustments for the next content update. So combat in Albion Online is a very, very central part, and most activities you do kinda are related to that, even if that's not your main activity. So for example, gathering. Gatherers' main activity is gathering, but they still need to fight because they have to fight against potential gankers. And that's a situation where we think right now gatherers don't really shine well. They are a bit in a disadvantaged situation, especially because they don't progress with their main activity. And we want to change this now by introducing Gatherer gear. That's a specific gear that you only unlock through gathering. So you will improve your combat abilities, so to say. So you will unlock the next gear on the higher tier, which helps your survivability in a ganking attempt. You will unlock these purely by gathering. So with your main activity, you don't need to go PvE farming to increase your survival chances there. And the Gatherer gear will consist of 4 items. That is an armor piece, and a helmet, and shoes, and a big backpack that you can equip on your cape slot. The armor gives you a passive ability that improves your gathering yield and your gathering speed. So say if you're a wood gatherer, you get a wood gatherer armor you can unlock, and this wood gatherer armor gives you a gathering yield and gathering speed bonus on wood. So it makes you better at your specific resource. Also, the armor gives you a spell which is very good for escaping and survivability, and generally relates to your task. That is gathering or carrying a lot of weight. So, for instance, you get a defensive buff, but this defensive buff also contains a gathering speed bonus while it's active, so you can chop down trees faster. And also, they often have a component which also temporarily increases your max load bonus, or your max load bonus for this resource. This is especially useful for gatherers which get dismounted by gankers, so they can activate their gathering gear abilities to temporarily still be able to move, although they are potentially overloaded. And every gathering armor gets a new unique spell, so we have 5 armors, so for each resource, like wood, ore, and so on. And it may be that you say, like, yeah, I have a new cool spell for escaping, but actually I preferred ambush better. It helped me more for my playstyle. And now I have this so that you don't get this conflict that you say like, oh yeah, I want to have this spell, but I need the bonus from this armor. We will give the gathering armors the best escaping spells as a choice too. So you have them as a off choice. So you can say like, okay, I take ambush rather than my wood gathering spell. And the same will be true for the gathering helmet and the gathering shoes. They will have one unique spell and the best escaping survivability options from the other main items. And if you have specific builds you have been playing as gatherers, please note them in the comments. We would like to see them, that we don't miss any playstyle. So we do our best to put all the spells in we think are the best, but please let us know what you think are the best escaping options so we can make double sure we don't miss any. And the last part of your gathering gear will be your backpack on the cape slot. This gives you a passive bonus on max load for your resource. So that means like if you're a wood gatherer, then you get a big wood backpack, you can carry more wood. You don't get overloaded so fast by it. And all the gatherer gear items are available from tier 4 up to tier 8, which gives you a nice way of specialization in your role and progress. And I'm really looking forward to it because I think it will make the world of Albion Online way more diverse. If you see like gatherers with their equipment running through the world, and also it will make the very important role of gatherers more meaningful and gives them a better progression in general. And one detail I would like to mention still is if you equip your gatherer gear, you mainly progress through gathering. You unlock the new tiers by gathering, but if you equip your gathering gear and fight mobs, you still get the combat fame for your gathering gear as a specialization, similar to like the normal armor specializations where you get the additional item power for fighting mobs. This is there to so you don't waste the combat fame, so you don't feel like, oh, I need to switch to my combat gear so I don't waste it. So that is one big change. So, and the next one, oh yeah, that's, we also get new armors that's called the Royal Faction armors. We had them in a beta before, and we now